Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you and happy
Yeah,
holidays.
happy
Now, what
holidays.
would I look like if you happened to see me on the bus?
What would you look like?
You would
Uh,
see me wearing a mask again.
oh, okay.
There are 10,000 patients, more than expected or more than the typical week in the hospitals between COVID, the flu, and RSV.
Hmm.
It's not an epidemic like the one we lived through, but it's a pretty serious thing. And I decided to be careful anytime I'm in a close place with other people, like a bus or
Yeah,
something.
that's probably a smart thing. Yeah. I guess
Yeah.
the other thing is not epidemic like it was, and also I think the symptoms and the reactions are not as severe as they were 3, 4 years ago, where people were dying left and right from COVID. I don't think we're seeing that kind of severity with the reactions today, are we?
Yeah. I just saw an article. It was about an 81-year-old psychologist,
Mm.
and they've taken everything he wrote, which was a lot, he's very prominent, and turned it into a program, a chatbot, that can sound like him and give people advice.
Mm.
And he decided it was so good, he would endorse it.
Mm-hmm.
Just passing through in that article, it mentioned that he had lost 8 friends to COVID.
Really?
He's 81,
Okay.
and the risk goes up the older you get. So it's very serious. You should make up your own mind what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm reporting on the radio is simply the fact that there are a lot of cases lately. And it hit home. A few weeks ago, Jenny got a new hip. She's
Mm-hmm.
doing well. She's walking around town using a cane, but getting much better. But they decided when her first day, her legs were very weak and she started to fall. So they decided to keep her in the hospital for a second day. But the hospital, which is Mount Sinai, a major hospital, couldn't find a bed for her.
Really?
So she stayed in the room, the recovery room,
Mm-hmm.
where she had been after her operation until the next afternoon when they let her go home.
Hmm.
So yes, it is affecting hospitals. It is definitely serious. And whether or not you take a step, we all know all the arguments on that.
Yeah.
Now, there's something that you covered on the show a whole lot, and I had a new story coming on it. Universal basic income. I'm
Yeah, this
for
is
it.
something that we've talked about in the past. We haven't talked about it lately, but a recent story just came out. Universal basic income is also called unconditional basic income. And both those adjectives are make sense with when you see what it is. Basically, it's a no strings attached payment to people, to individuals, on a often on a monthly basis, sometimes on an annual basis, as to provide a financial floor to individuals and families. It's unconditional in that there's no requirement. You have to have no financial showing of poverty or whatever. There's no conditions attached to it. Um, they're also calling it universal in that the hope and the aspiration is that it will become widespread and available to everyone. Now it's interesting. This story just came out. Interview of the mayor or past mayor of Stockton, California, gentleman by the name of Michael Tubbs, and he started a UBI program back in 2019, and it was very successful. Um, uh, they gave out. Let me see if I can find the dollar amount that they gave out. They had 125 participants, and it ran for 2 years. It gave folks $500 a month, total of about $46,000, Dave. And there was so much skepticism and criticism. Folks were saying things like, "Oh, you give people money, especially poor people, they're going to squander it. They're going to buy drugs. They're going to buy liquor. They're going to buy alcohol. It's going to be a disincentive to find work." And as it turns out, none of that stuff is true. There have been a number of studies. We'll talk a little bit about Stockton, California, and then some others. Um, but apparently, they saw that folks spent money on things like utilities, necessities, food, and on their kids. They also saw an improvement in overall health of those that got the guaranteed income, and they saw that their stress decreased. Um, there's so many myths and lies really out there about UBI, and my own personal view, Dave, is that you know a lot of folks have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are, and in keeping folks on the bottom and keeping folks poor, and that there's a lot of pressure to not bring these types of programs to fruition, but they work. One of the things that I've talked about with some of my other colleagues previously is that this type of economic floor gives folks the freedom and the headspace to explore their other interests, so they're not necessarily just on a treadmill trying to pay their bills. Yeah, Dave.
Well, you and I have a strong feeling on this. Most people haven't even heard of it because the politicians who should haven't jumped on it. But one of the people who is most enthusiastic about this is Sam Altman, the head
Mm-hmm.
of OpenAI, who is very much in the news, very rich, and thinks AI is going to be very important and it's going to work so well. A heck of a lot of people are going to be put out of work, he told the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
So the Times asked him what should be done about it. And he said, a lot of people here in Silicon Valley are saying we should have a universal basic income to protect the people because so many people are likely to lose their jobs in the next few years because of what AI will do. Now, that's not a crazy thing to fear. Google is laying off 30,000 people
Mm-hmm.
and saying that a lot of that's going to be replaced with AI. It hasn't happened much in the overall economy. There haven't been trends you could see, but it's certainly something that's quite possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the strongest arguments I've ever heard for UBI. It's, I mean, the Christians have this right. Jesus had this right. We must care for the people who have less.
Mm-hmm.
That's all over the Bible. And that's something that we tend to forget. I don't know any successful politician or any successful writer who does not make more than $50,000 or so, and most of them are way above it. And very few of them have friends who are living on 15,000
Mm-hmm.
or 18,000 or know what it is like and how hard it is in this country. Here in New York, we have 40,000 homeless, and we're turning people away from shelters in some circumstances. There should be, well, you can make up your mind about it, but we're giving you some of the data. One of the the supposedly Democratic senator from West Virginia was quoted on all the government programs in the pandemic that gave people money.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to vote against one of them. Why? Because they'd spend it all on drinks and drugs, he said, privately. But whoever heard him privately made the comment public.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the way it goes.
No,
Rich people
not
do
at
more
all.
drugs and more drinking because they can afford it.
Not at all. And interestingly, I just recently found out that of all places, Alaska has been doing something they call the Alaska Permanent Fund. It's a dividend that comes from the oil industry up there, and they've been giving away money since I think was it, let me see, I think for
Many years ago.
38 years, Dave, they've
Yep,
been
that's
giving
when they
no
started the
strings
North
attached
Throat,
money to families.
and there was so much coming from the taxes on the North Throat. There's so much oil coming out of it
Yeah,
that they decided to start this program and just share it with
yeah.
everybody in Alaska.
They've been doing it for 38 years, and they have seen full-time employment remain steady and an overall uptick in the percentage of people working part-time since the program began in 1982. So, I mean, there's no data, absolutely no data to support the notion that giving folks some sort of universal basic income, some sort of floor, economic floor, somehow deters them from working, deters them from finding a job, somehow makes them lazy and not initiative in the workforce. It's just not the case. So, I mean, this is something that there have been a number of trials around the country. There have been trials in Europe as well. And every one that I've looked at has been successful. You know, the key is getting the politicians and the public will behind it to actually finance it. That's the real key.
Now, how much do you think it would cost net?
Not as much as they're spending over in Ukraine or
Well,
in Gaza. How about that? Not that much.
you can talk about
Not
all
not
of that,
not
but there's
not 20
something
billion
even more
dollars.
dramatic. We are spending so much on social workers and program supervisors and bureaucrats and
Mm,
running the program
mm,
that if you didn't need to do that, you would save a heck of a lot of money.
wow.
Not quite enough to pay for the uniform basic income, but an awful lot of it.
Yeah, yeah.
So it wouldn't be that expensive to do. I've been reading about this and supporting it since the 1960s. And
Mm-hmm,
it was the first time I heard about this.
mm-hmm.
And it makes even more sense today.
Yeah, it sure does. You know, just given the widespread poverty and as you said, the looming automation and mechanization that we're going to see with technology and with AI in particular, is just
Yeah.
going to transform the workplace and put a lot of folks out of work.
I've looked at that fairly hard. It is absolutely sure that a lot of people will lose their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
It's not clear that unemployment overall will go up. And in fact, we're at the lowest unemployment rate in 20 years, 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Uh, even though there's been lots of automation and everything for a long
Mm-hmm.
time. That's because there are some economic tools, fiscal and monetary, that a government can use to affect the total rate of employment. So if a lot of people are getting out of work because of the machines, any machine, government has to push harder on the fiscal and monetary levers and can probably keep the unemployment down. But if you're the person whose job goes, it doesn't do you much good if somebody out in Texas winds up getting a job because of the fiscal policy.
Certainly doesn't.
They're still in rough shape. People should be protected.
And what about that, 5% or so that are permanently unemployed? They say the unemployment rate is low, but it's never zero. The whole capitalist model says it will never even get close to zero. What about all those folks on the bottom? That's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that have no chance of being unemployed. What about them?
Well, part of that is that the unemployment rate that they announce is not the number of people who are not employed.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were saying, the permanently unemployed. There are a lot of people who have just given up
Yeah.
because somebody who's 62 and has a bad leg may just not be able to find a job.
Mm-hmm.
Those people are not counted.
Right.
So the rough rule of thumb from when I was studying economics was you took the number they give out, it's 4 point something percent these days, and double it
Right.
to find the real unemployment rate. And I
Mhm.
think the doubling is still the right
Yeah,
percentage, but I
yeah,
have.
yeah, at least. And then, you look at specific populations, for instance, like the New York City Housing Authority population, a full 50% of that population is unemployed, Dave. 50% of almost 500,000 people unemployed. And the average income level, even among those that are employed, is in the low $20,000, right? Hovering right around the poverty level. So you got 500,000 people that are struggling every day just to put food on the table, just to clothe their kids, just to make ends meet.
Again, I spend most of my time in a world where people were very successful. I do know a few billionaires and a lot of very rich people. It's really easy to forget the people who don't have the money, who
Hmm.
are really struggling. And that's something that Jesus Christ would not have accepted.
Yeah,
I'm all with Jesus on this.
yeah, yeah. Well,
You asked about
I
a
grew
news
up in
story?
public housing and still to this day, I spend a lot of time working in public housing. Really smart, industrious folks, but they're struggling because the resources just are slim, the opportunities are slim, and something like UBI would help put a floor out there that would help give folks a baseline from which to operate. So, I'm all for that. And, I know there's some folks that were trying to get it started in Harlem and it hasn't happened yet, but, I'm going to try and bring Diana Blackwell is her name. I think you know her. She's been on the show. I'm going to try and get her on the back on the show sometime soon to talk about that. She's been a really outspoken advocate for UBI in the Harlem community.
And I'll pick up some of the comments from the people in artificial intelligence
Hmm.
about why it may be more important now than it ever was.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me turn that to a better story that's
Okay.
directly related. It's about artificial intelligence, which we do too much of on the show, but there's that much happening. What what's the effect of putting artificial intelligence live in a hospital
What do we mean live in a hospital? Like in?
or a business setting? It turns out that, I'm sorry,
No, go
I
ahead. You
missed your
broke up
comment.
for a minute. You said
Oh,
live in a
sorry.
hospital. What does that mean, Dave? What?
You put it in, and let's say that the artificial intelligence can do about as well as the average employee.
Mm-hmm.
That's a goal. Who benefits? Overwhelmingly, it's the people who are still working who are on the bottom of the capabilities list.
Mm-hmm.
That giving them the AI tool will often raise them up to the average level.
Okay.
Whereas people who are very good at what they're doing, no, AI and many things are not as good. This
Mm-hmm.
is a big question in radiology right now. It's clear that, well, there's many serious studies from places like Harvard that certain kinds of x-rays can be read as well as the average radiologist.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, do they put it in? Mount Sinai actually did. I had an MRI and it was read by the machine, by the artificial intelligence, but also by a radiologist. But think of that in schools. Think if a student working with an AI got up to the average level. It's not going to help the people who are in the valedictorians
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. It's going to have more help for the people who really need the help. That's one of the good pieces of
Yeah, that's a
news.
good thing. That's a good thing.
In
Mhm.
fact, there's another one just on this idea. Came from the chief. This came from Justice John Roberts, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and he does an annual thing. And the feature this year was AI. The headlines on the thing was Roberts says AI will not replace judges, and that's a whole nother question. Uh,
Okay.
because clearly AI gets some things wrong,
Hmm.
but so do a lot of judges.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
But what he said, what if we had AI for people who didn't have a lawyer.
Hmm.
Them, even if the AI is not perfect, it puts them in a much better place.
Mm-hmm.
And making that possible, there's no doubt that the technology is there today. In my AI reporting, I'm reporting things like that every week.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
interesting. I mean, you see so much slipshod work in lawyering for poor and downtrodden people. That's interesting. If AI could somehow be inserted into that mix, there might be a big uptick and make a big
it's
improvement.
likely to help the inferior lawyers get up to average, and even more, it can help the people who can't afford a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's some good, and that example actually came from the Chief Justice of the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. Supreme Court,
Interesting.
who underplays the problem of people without a lawyer, but knows it exists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it might root out some of the bias and the corruption as well. That would be interesting if that happened.
Hey,
Just a side story. Yusef Salam, one of the original Central Park Five, that was convicted back in 1990 falsely.
of something they didn't do, absolutely clearly, somebody else was ultimately convicted of it.
Yeah, but it looks like there was slipshod lawyering from what I saw. There was, no eyewitnesses, no DNA. I don't know if AI would have helped get to the bottom of that, but there was a lot of hysteria, a lot of racism, souping up the media, to go after these black kids. So I don't know if AI could have any kind of impact on that, Dave,
It
on that
certainly
aspect
could
of
help the
criminal justice.
defense, whoever is the defense. Right now, I could go to ChatGPT and ask it to give me a long essay on what is important defending teenagers from a charge of murder in New York State.
Hmm.
It could say you should make sure that DNA is inspected. You should do this, you should do that. This is something that's important for you to look at. So making it into a lawyer, that's going to be tough, although maybe doable.
Hmm.
But making it into something that can really help the defense lawyers,
Hmm.
get them organized, get them information.
I got you. Okay.
Every any sensible lawyer is using it sometimes.
Yeah. So it's not a replacement. It's a tool that helps improve.
It certainly works as a tool.
Hmm.
As people learn how to use it, it gets better and better. And we know there are things that AI is going to do that we're horrified by.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, the Europeans just made it illegal to use face recognition, except on major cases by the police and security
Good.
issues,
Good.
because we've reported it here on the show several times.
Hmm.
It's not accurate enough.
No, very error prone. Yeah, and especially against black and brown folks, especially black women. Yeah. So, Dave, I think we got to take a break. A number of things I want to talk about when we come back. One of the stories that caught my attention was a story on car app stalking, using GPS and other apps in cars to stalk partners in relationships. Really kind of bit of a scary notion, but something that folks need to be aware of. I know you have some other stories you want to talk about AI and the war and what's going on in Gaza as well. So
After the break, during the break, hopefully we'll hear some music from Billy Taylor, whose widow just passed a week ago.
yeah, the great Billy Taylor. Yeah, Jazzmobile, among many other accomplishments. Okay, you're listening to Comedian Technology on WACR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief musical break. we're back. Community technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about AI and some of its impact. Dave, you had a little follow up you wanted to mention.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in AI that are dangerous and harmful. We talk about that here too. And we also talk about what it could do. And I thought during the break about an example. There's an 83-year-old woman in my building. Very nice, very cogent. I've known her for years. I think she's a retired professor. She certainly talks like one. Uh, and she had a fall, broke two ribs, has had a lot of problem, and
Hmm.
is sometimes and is in a lot of pain.
Hmm.
So of course I told her a good doctor I knew and urged her to go, and so on and so forth. She's too proud to go further because I know Jenny just had a hip replacement. It was arranged by Mount Sinai Hospital, where she had the operation, for her to get a lot of support. Home helpers, physical therapists coming to the house, uh, calls every day from a nurse to make sure she was okay. And the system in New York State is like that. They it isn't perfect, but it gives a lot of help. So the first thing that could be done today, and if I had the time, I'd be proud to do it myself, is you can set up an AI chatbot that somebody can go to and say, I'm 83 years old, I'm having trouble getting around. What resources are there for me, and where and how do I apply for it? Because from what I know of the system, if she walked into one of the human resources offices and and they had a doctor or nurse evaluate her, there would be somebody in her home 3 days a week helping her with the things she really can't do.
So your point, David, is some folks are too proud to go into a service center and lay out their needs face to face. But if there were a way to do it anonymously over, talking to a chat box, if you will, that they would take advantage of that.
That, and most people don't know what's available to them. I saw a number that something like 30 or 50% of the people eligible for food stamps don't get them.
Hmm.
Many of them have no idea that they could get them and how.
Hmm.
An AI can give you answers to those questions. It's being used by almost every major corporation trying to get you the answers so they don't have to put somebody on the phone to answer your questions.
Hmm.
That technology is mature, it's not expensive, it would work well.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that can be done with AI and why it's important that it comes, but it's also important we look at the downsides and take care of them.
Hmm. Speaking of downsides of technology, Dave, there's some other technology that's been around for a while, predates AI, and that's smartphone technology. And just ran across a story about how it's being weaponized in cars to track abusive partners in relationships.
Now,
Uh,
how could that be? How could
well,
somebody use that?
for instance, Mercedes-Benz has something called Embrace, which is a tracking system. You basically got smartphone on wheels, and the husband in this relationship is the guy that had the title to the car, and the wife in the relationship, even though she was making the actual payments herself and got a restraining order against the husband and granted sole use of the car by the court, she could
What
not
was the
she
husband doing?
she couldn't turn off this tracking system that her husband had access to. So he was able to see where she was, track her every movement, and she went to Mercedes Benz and said, "Sorry, we can't help you. Nothing we can do about it." And the husband was harassing her, turning on the heat in the car and in the middle of the summertime while it's in the garage, heating it up, turning on the air conditioning in the winter, making it cold before she got in it, all kind of you might call it nuisance harassment, but he was also following her. She moved to a new location that she had hoped to keep secret from her ex, but because of the tracking system in the car, he found out the location and started driving around her home in his car and tracking her, if you will. And apparently there's no there's no recourse if you are not the owner of the automobile. Right now, there's no recourse. The story about Mercedes Benz, another story about Tesla, and in all these cases, the person that was being abused went to the car manufacturer and could not get control of this tracking activity that the automobile did. Um, it's and I'm looking at here. A Nissan in particular says it might collect information in a car about sexual activity in a car. I mean,
How would it do that?
crazy. 25 car brands are doing this kind of tracking. Now, we've talked previously on the show, Dave. I know about tracking your location data, where you're going, looking at the stores where you're stopping, and how that data can be sold to advertisers. They also this is cars again, and automobile manufacturers track data about your driving habits that they then sell to the insurance company so they can see whether you speed, how fast you turn, whether you're doing moderate or not so moderate braking and acceleration, that kind of data. We had talked about that before, but I had never seen this particular domestic violence type of activity based on the smartphone capability built into the car. The lady with the Mercedes, she had to go to a mechanic and spend $400 to get the system taken out because the court wouldn't do it, Mercedes wouldn't do it, and she got it taken out. But it also disabled her GPS. So it's a difficult situation. One bright light is that there recently some federal legislation passed called the Safe Connections Act that allows victims of domestic abuse to sever their phone accounts with that are shared with their abusers. So a number of folks are trying to get that law amended to include the a protective order for the digital access systems in cars. But right now, today, there is no recourse. If you don't control that system yourself, you're in trouble. So one of the caveats, Dave, just to kind of close off where the story went, is that if you're in a relationship, if you jointly own a car, that you should jointly control the apps that are in the car. A lot of folks don't even know that they have the apps there, but
How
that should
many
be
people
something that
know
is
that you
jointly
have a cell
controlled.
phone in every car that's talking to the automaker constantly and showing you a location? Do you
What
think
about
most
that?
people know that?
No, most people don't know that. No.
I do, because I've been reporting on telecom and their equipment, and I know who's putting them in.
Hmm.
Almost every car today sold has something that's the same thing as a cell phone, sometimes uses the same chips, that hooks up to the manufacturer and feeds them things like how fast you're driving and some useful things. If a car has a tire pressure reading, it can find out that your tire pressure is low and
Yeah.
feed that
Yeah,
back
interesting that
to the
I
phone.
had my wife has a relatively new car that has this system in it. I didn't even know how it worked, but I'm out in Brooklyn or Bronx rather, have a flat tire, and when I get home, she said, "Oh, how did it go? You had a flat tire." She got notified via email from the car smart system that the car had been disabled, that the car had a flat tire, and I think the location as well. So
Let me
we
give,
didn't even know that feature was there, and boom, it was.
yeah. And she could have tracked where you were,
Yeah,
and
my
who knows
God.
who you were visiting. Yeah, who knows who you were visiting. And that's built in. And of course, a lot of parents use that on their kids
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
track where their kids are. Let me bring in quickly another auto story that came up.
Okay.
Stu, how far do you think you can go in an electric vehicle on one charge?
250 miles is about what I've seen as the limit.
Well, it's up now.
Mm-hmm.
One case up dramatically. The president of a Chinese auto manufacturer called NIO that makes electric cars has a
Mm-hmm.
new kind of battery that they say can hold more. And how did he prove it? He drove 650 miles
What?
himself,
Wow.
being tracked, and at the end of it, showed the gauge that he still had a 3% charge. Now, I'm sure he drove very slowly and very carefully, but two things to take away from that. One is that electric cars are constantly getting better,
Mm-hmm.
and I can give you a half dozen ways the computers in them are getting better. And the other is the United States is not always first in things.
Yeah.
And the Japanese, I don't mean the Japanese, the Chinese are far ahead of us in batteries for electric vehicles. In fact, Ford made a deal with BYD, I think it was, one was it BYD? One of the Chinese companies to do a joint factory because they wanted to get the technology they were using in China
Mm-hmm.
because it was better.
Wow, 600 miles on a charge. That's phenomenal, Dave. That's like triple, what the average has been.
And it's not a small car either.
Mhm.
Yeah, now
Wow.
that's a car that's not on the market yet. It's not going to come out possibly to the third quarter of this year.
Hmm.
But
But still, the technology is there. Hmm.
now I have a story about artificial intelligence here that I want to give, and
Okay.
accuracy and statistics. And when some things I learned in eighth grade of mathematics.
Okay. What's that, Dave?
I'm getting it here.
Okay. You're listening to Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on Community Technology 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. We're talking about AI. Dave has an update for us.
I learned in eighth grade mathematics that it is impossible to exactly measure something,
Hmm.
that you can come very close with your ruler, but if you really need to know it to a millionth of an inch, and the chip guys do need to know things to a millionth of an inch, there's no ruler you can put in there.
Right.
It's always going to be an error in any measurement, and how much that is key. In polling or surveys or research, there are a standard error that's calculated based on how many you test.
Hmm.
If you test four times, they may all four times it may come up heads. If you test 100 times, you're much more likely to get 50 heads and 50. Actually, no, you're not likely to get 50 heads and 50 tails, but you're likely to get something pretty close to it.
Hmm.
When you interview people on how they're going to vote and what's going on, you almost never have enough to be 1% accurate. And especially when you go into subgroups saying the women think this, the men think that, well, you have fewer of them and it's less accurate. Okay, there was a research group that every 4 years does a poll in New Hampshire where they're based, and it made headlines because it said Trump was ahead 33% to 29%.
Hmm.
Now, they in their press release, no, they in their press release got it right, but all the news reports said Yes, and there's a possible error of 4%. And one of the news reports said, well, there's a possible error of 4%. It could have been the other way around. And that's true.
Mhm.
And that's why you want to know what the error rate is to know
Right.
how certain you can be. But people who know surveys realize there are many other forms of error possible. The order of the names asked can make a big difference. Traditionally, in elections, whoever gets the first spot on the ballot gets 1 to 3% more votes. Doesn't matter
Mhm.
which one it is,
Just by the position.
just by the position.
Hmm.
And that's standard in politics. That's particularly important in races where people don't have much information, like local races that don't make the
Hmm.
news. Another one can do the tone of voice of an interviewer when reading the names, which candidate do you prefer, has a subtle effect on the results.
Hmm.
So, any survey you see is not going to be accurate, and many of them, none of them are going to be, well, not none of them, but most of them have a real error problem that's more than the standard error here that was put on 4%.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's the nature of the technology and how you test and math. And I had a good math teacher in 8th grade who explained this all to me.
But Dave, isn't
What
it also a function of the nature of just human nature, and how you ask a question can determine what kind of answer you get. I just know that just basic psychology, you know.
Oh, yeah. I can think of a whole pile of surveys, including one in an organization that we belong to, that how they asked the question determined what the people's answer was going to be.
Hmm.
And that's a standard technique in every political poll,
Hmm.
if you want to influence it one way or another.
So I
And
guess
it's a
the long and short of this is, Dave, is we should be very skeptical of poll results. And
which doesn't mean they're useless. 10% of the polls said that Trump was going to beat Hillary Clinton. When you and I and almost every reporter in the country was sure Hillary Clinton was going to win.
hmm.
Uh, and yeah, so these are the things that you have to know.
Hmm.
Now, I'm doing hot technology now is AI. And on this show, we've talked before about how many errors the big AI systems make. It's amazing how good they are in coming up with answers and how they can, for example, I had an idea for a screenplay Jenny was working in. I popped it into ChatGPT and it gave an outline of what are the interesting problems and what should go into that screenplay, which included some things she hadn't thought of.
Hmm.
That's good. I run almost every story I write through an AI, which catches not just my spelling errors, but grammar and logic errors.
Right.
Right. But we also know, and if I had another 2 hours, I can explain to you why, that AI, the biggest, the chat GPTs of the world, makes a lot of errors. We have the fancy name for it. It's called hallucinations.
Yeah.
It's really just mistakes. And everybody in this field is working on cutting that down. But a survey of some of the large models found that 3 to 10% of the time they make a mistake. It just caught, well, we did that story already. The lawyer who used AI
Yeah.
put 5 uh, citations in that the judge noticed, wanted to check, and the judge noticed they didn't exist.
Made them up.
Yeah, because AI in what it's doing is trying to come to the closest, the most probable answer. And if it doesn't find a 99.9% probable answer, it'll give you the 90% probable
Hmm.
answer.
Hmm.
And that 90% probable answer is going to be wrong sometimes.
Mhm. And Dave, I just ran across a story about how Microsoft's AI chat box replies to election questions with conspiracies, fake scandals, and lies. You know, this is in Wired magazine. They asked Chatbot, recently renamed by Microsoft Copilot, about polling locations for the 2024 election, and the bot referenced in-person voting by linking to an article about Russian President Vladimir Putin running for re-election next year. And when asked about electoral candidates, it listed numerous GOP candidates that have already pulled out of the race. I mean,
Eh,
it's going to be a scary election season coming up with this technology out there, Dave. What do you think?
Well, the stuff that we're working with, the new AI models, is incredible. It does incredible things, and usually it's right. So when you're working with it, you get in the habit of assuming it's right. Everybody in the field knows it makes mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to ChatGPT, there's a line on the bottom saying that there's sometimes inaccuracies in the responses. If it's important, check it yourself.
Right.
There's now a proposal from the U.S. District Court in New Orleans to change their rules and add to the rules of the court that every filing with the court has to have a statement either AI was not used to produce this,
Really
or if AI was used to produce this, a human being checked everything in it.
interesting.
That's they asked for comments on that, and it caught Mickey Cohn.
Yeah.
Mickey Cohn was the chief fixer for Donald Trump.
Ah, okay.
He arranged his payoff to the porn star of a few $100,000
Right.
in various things. That was presumably illegal. What happened, I don't know if he was cheating on his taxes to do it or whatever. And he now has a criminal trial in New York on that. The chief witness in that case is Mickey Cohn, who had been his lawyer for many years, who actually handled the payment details. Well, Mickey Cohn, in another case, just filed a petition with the court to end his probation or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sent it to ChatGPT. ChatGPT gave him an example of what he should say. He passed it to his lawyer. His lawyer, fortunately, checked it, told the judge about the problem, and the judge got really angry. And the Trump lawyer said, they don't have a case anymore because we can prove that Mickey Cohn habitually lies.
Mm.
That's just in the last week.
Wow.
But the frightening thing, AI is being used in weapons quite widely now. It's definitely been used by the Russians, the
Uh-huh.
Ukrainians, and the Israelis. The details on all of this stuff tend to be secret, but it comes out because the Russians go to different weapons demonstrations and show what they can do. And the Israelis have several companies that are selling equipment around the world because of how great their AI is. So presumably they're using it. We just talked about the kind of errors in polling and in AI. Well, I don't know whether the Israelis target their aerial bombs using AI, but it's certainly possible, and they may very well be. So, what happens if there's an error? I'm reading to you from the AP. The Times had a similar story. In a bombing raid in Gaza, was killed Issam al-Mughabri, a longtime employee of the UN Development Program that gives out relief. His wife and their 5 children, and a total of 76 people in his family.
Wow.
Now, there's a good chance that the Israelis don't try to, well, there's no evidence, and I haven't seen it happening too often, that the Israelis deliberately target civilians. They're dying by the 20,000s because that's the nature of war. And this was the nature of war if AI is targeting where those bombs go.
Mm-hmm.
That the Israelis presumably wanted to take out something that was nearby, targeted it wrong, and took out the UN worker, 5 in his family, 5 of his direct relatives, and 71 other relatives.
Wow.
Now, this is not the place to talk about who's right in the war between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Every one of you has your own opinion. We're talking about what we learn about technology and what happens there. I'm 6,000 miles away, and so are you, from where the battle is happening. But if you want to have an opinion on it, I urge you and anyone else to take the time to find the facts and the reality, because I can tell you on the internet, there's a whole lot of lies about what's going on from both sides,
Mm-hmm.
director propaganda. What's
Yeah, well,
happening?
our job, David, is to report, what we know, the facts as we see them, and in particular, given the nature of our show, how technology is impacting the conflict. So, that's kind of where we're coming from, looking at the tech and how it's being used, good or bad, one side or the other, it's being applied. And as we have talked over the last months or so, there are a lot of errors and a lot of problems with AI's accuracy. And the fact that it's now being used in warfare is a little concerning, just given its lack of total reliability.
We
Yeah.
brought to the show a while back a proposal that went through an organization of states in North and South America. 21 of them signed a declaration that artificial intelligence should not be used in lethal weapons unless a human is directly supervising it.
Mm-hmm.
The two countries that refused to sign were the United States and Canada. This has come up at the UN General Assembly. 2 others that refused to go along with the ban on artificial intelligence and lethal weapons were Russia and China.
Mm-hmm.
You can draw your own conclusions from those facts.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for that insight. This has been Community and Technology on WHR 90.3, The Voice of Harlem. Every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Tune in. Just might learn something. Thanks and good night.